My fiancé's family mocked me during the reception. They didn't know I had just learned a secret that would change everything. I always imagined my wedding day would be one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, halfway through the reception, I was sitting at the sweetheart table trying not to cry into my champagne. My name is Emily, and 3 hours earlier, I had married the man I'd been with for 5 years, Jason. The ceremony itself had been beautiful. The weather was perfect, the venue looked like something out of a magazine, and for a few hours I actually believed everything was going exactly the way I'd dreamed. Then Jason's family arrived at the reception. Now, I knew his family wasn't particularly fond of me. His mother, Diane, had made that clear from the moment we got engaged. According to her, Jason could do better. I wasn't from a wealthy family. I worked as a school counselor while Jason worked in finance. His family came from old money, country clubs, and private schools. Mine came from hard work and student loans. Diane never outright said I wasn't good enough. She just found creative ways to imply it. At family dinners, she'd ask if I was still working that little counseling job. She'd compliment my clothes by saying things like, "You always make affordable outfits look so nice." And every time I accomplished something, she'd somehow find a way to minimize it. Jason always told me to ignore her. That's just how Mom is. I wish I had listened to my instincts instead. The trouble started almost immediately after dinner. The DJ had barely finished introducing the wedding party when Jason's older sister, Brittany, grabbed the microphone. "I just want to say how shocked we all are that Jason finally settled down," she announced with a laugh. Several members of his family burst out laughing. I forced a smile. Then came the next joke. And the next. And the next. Every speech from Jason's side somehow turned into a roast aimed directly at me. One uncle joked that Jason must have lost a bet. Another said he was amazed Jason married someone who didn't know which fork to use at formal dinners. The room laughed. I laughed too. Because what else was I supposed to do? But inside, I felt humiliated. I looked toward Jason several times, expecting him to say something. Anything. Instead, he just chuckled awkwardly and took another sip of his drink. That hurt more than the jokes. Then came Diane's speech. She stood, raised her champagne glass, and smiled sweetly. The room went silent. "Jason has always deserved the very best," she began. The guests nodded. And while life doesn't always give us exactly what we expect, the room erupted with laughter before she'd even finished the sentence. My stomach dropped. Even some of my own guests looked uncomfortable. I could feel my cheeks burning. But Diane wasn't done. "Oh, don't look so serious, Emily. We're only teasing." Only teasing. The favorite phrase of every bully. I excused myself and headed toward the restroom before anyone could see the tears forming in my eyes. That's when everything changed. Because while standing alone in the hallway, trying to pull myself together, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. At first, I almost ignored it. Then I read the first sentence. "You don't know me, but before you spend another minute celebrating with Jason's family, there's something you need to see." Attached was a photo. A photo that made my entire body go cold. And suddenly, the cruel jokes at the reception became the least of my problems. My hands started shaking before I even opened the photo. Something about the message felt wrong. Not like a prank. Not like spam. The kind of wrong that makes your stomach drop before your brain has time to catch up. I tapped the image. For a second, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Then my heart stopped. It was Jason. There was no mistaking him. The photo showed him sitting a woman I had never seen before. Normally, that wouldn't have meant anything. Except they weren't sitting like friends. His hand was resting on hers. And the timestamp in the corner showed the picture had been taken only 3 weeks before our wedding. 3 weeks. My vision blurred. I immediately texted back. "Who is this?" The reply came almost instantly. "Someone who thinks you deserve the truth." I felt sick. Then another message appeared. "Check your email." I just sent everything. Everything. That word alone made my pulse race. I opened my inbox. A new email had arrived. No name. No profile picture. Just a subject line. "Jason isn't who you think he is." I clicked it. Inside were dozens of attachments. Photos, screenshots, hotel receipts, text conversations. And every single one pointed to the same horrifying conclusion. Jason had been having an affair. Not months ago. Not years ago. Right up until the wedding. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. The messages between them were explicit. Intimate. Undeniable. One text from only 9 days earlier read, "I can't wait until all this wedding stuff is over so we can finally stop sneaking around." I read it 3 times. Maybe 4. Praying I had misunderstood. But there was no misunderstanding. My husband had cheated on me. And judging by the messages, his family knew. I scrolled further. My blood ran cold. There was a screenshot from a group chat. A family group chat. Diane. Brittany. Several relatives. And Jason. The conversation happened 2 weeks before the wedding. Brittany had written, "Still can't believe he's actually going through with marrying her." Someone replied, "At least her family is paying for half the wedding." Then Diane responded, "The words are burned into my memory forever. Once they're married, he can handle things however he wants. She's useful right now. Useful. Not loved. Not valued. Useful." Tears filled my eyes. Suddenly every joke, every insult, every fake smile, every cruel comment during the reception made sense. They weren't teasing me. They never accepted me. They were laughing because they knew something I didn't. I felt completely humiliated. But then I noticed one final attachment. A PDF. The title caught my attention immediately. Property Transfer Agreement. Confused, I opened it. The document contained information about Jason's grandfather's trust. A trust worth several $1,000,000. At first, I didn't understand why it mattered. Then I reached the highlighted section. And my entire world shifted again. Because according to the document, Jason's inheritance came with a condition. A very specific condition. One that nobody at the reception seemed to realize I now knew. If Jason was found to have entered the marriage fraudulently or was proven to be involved in infidelity during the first year of marriage, he would lose everything. Every single dollar. I stared at the screen. Then I slowly looked through the reception hall doors. Inside, Jason's family was still laughing, still drinking, still celebrating, completely unaware that the secret they had spent months hiding was now sitting in my inbox. And for the first time all night, I wasn't crying anymore. I was smiling, because they thought they had won. They had absolutely no idea what was about to happen next. For a few minutes, I just stood there in the hallway. The reception music echoed from the ballroom. People were dancing, laughing, celebrating. Meanwhile, my entire marriage had collapsed less than 3 hours after it began. The old me would have run. The old me would have cried. The old me would have confronted Jason immediately. But the evidence sitting in my inbox changed everything. I wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding. I wasn't dealing with a mistake. I was dealing with months of calculated lies. And suddenly, I became very calm. Dangerously calm. I wiped my tears, fixed my makeup, and walked back into the reception. Nobody noticed anything. Jason was standing near the bar laughing with his cousins. When he saw me, he smiled. That fake smile almost made me sick. "Hey, babe. You okay?" "Babe." The audacity. I smiled back. Perfect. He relaxed instantly. Good. Let him think everything was normal. Because I wasn't ready yet. I needed answers first. Over the next hour, I quietly moved around the reception collecting information. I approached relatives individually. I listened. I watched. And little by little, the pieces started falling into place. Several family members kept making strange comments. One aunt asked if I was excited about finally helping Jason settle down. Another joked that marriage changes priorities. Every comment felt loaded, like they were all in on some inside joke. Then I overheard something that confirmed my worst fears. I was walking past a side patio when I heard Brittany talking to one of her friends. Neither realized I was nearby. Honestly, I thought he'd call off the wedding. Her friend laughed. So did I. Brittany took a sip of her drink. Well, at least he'll get the inheritance now. My feet froze. The inheritance. There it was. Confirmation. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't just betrayal. This entire marriage had been a business transaction. A performance. A means to an end. And I was the fool they thought they'd manipulated. I quietly stepped away before they saw me. Then I made a decision. If they wanted a performance, I would give them one. I walked directly to the DJ booth. The DJ smiled politely. Need something? Actually, I said, I'd like to make a toast. A few minutes later, the DJ tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, the bride would like to say a few words. The room erupted into applause. Jason looked surprised. Diane looked curious. Brittany rolled her eyes. I took the microphone and walked to the center of the ballroom. Nearly 200 guests turned toward me. The room became silent. I smiled. First, I'd like to thank everyone for coming tonight. More applause. I continued. And I'd especially like to thank Jason's family. Diane beamed. Several relatives smiled proudly. Poor things. They thought this was going to be another grateful bride speech. I've learned so much from all of you today. The smiles grew wider. I glanced toward Jason. His expression suddenly looked nervous. Maybe some instinct was finally kicking in. Good. It takes a very special group of people, I continued, to spend an entire wedding reception mocking the bride while pretending it's all just harmless fun. The room instantly went quiet. You could hear a fork drop somewhere in the back. Diane's smile disappeared. Jason's face went pale. Brittany sat upright in her chair. I kept smiling. Tonight has been incredibly educational. Nobody laughed now. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then I pulled out my phone and held it up, especially after receiving a very interesting message during the reception. Jason's eyes widened. For the first time all evening, I saw genuine fear. Real fear. The kind that comes from knowing your secrets are about to stop being secrets. And that's when his phone started ringing. Over and over. Buzz. 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 Jason glanced down at the screen. His face lost all color. I didn't know who was calling, but judging from his reaction, someone else had just discovered the truth too. And whatever was happening, it was about to make this wedding far more unforgettable than anyone had planned. The ballroom was completely silent. Nearly 200 guests stared between me and Jason. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but everyone could feel it. Something had gone very, very wrong. Jason's phone continued vibrating in his hand. Buzz. 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 He looked at the screen again, then quickly declined the call. A second later it rang again. Same number. His hands were shaking now. That was the moment I knew. Whoever was calling wasn't just important. They were a problem. A massive problem. I looked at him and smiled. Jason, aren't you going to answer that? The room turned toward him. He swallowed hard. It's nothing. Nothing. Funny how liars always say that. I lifted my microphone again. Really? Because you look like someone just informed you that your entire future is collapsing. Several guests exchanged confused looks. Diane stood abruptly. Emily, I think you've had too much to drink. The classic move. Discredit the woman. Make her seem emotional, unstable, unreasonable. Unfortunately for Diane, I came prepared. I connected my phone to the projector that had been displaying wedding photos all evening. A few people gasped. Jason took a step forward. Emily, don't. I ignored him. The first image appeared on the giant screen. Jason sitting across from the mystery woman. His hand resting on hers. The timestamp clearly visible. 3 weeks before our wedding. The room exploded with whispers. Diane's face turned white. Brittany looked like she might faint. Jason immediately pointed at the screen. It's not what it looks like. Of course it wasn't. It never is. I clicked to the next image. Then the next. And the next. Hotel receipts. Photos. Text messages. Every excuse died before it left his mouth. People weren't whispering anymore. Now they were openly staring. One of Jason's uncles actually muttered, "Holy hell." Then came the group chat screenshots. The ones involving his family. I watched as guests read the messages projected across the ballroom wall. At least her family is paying for half the wedding. Still can't believe he's going through with it. She's useful right now. The room erupted. My parents looked devastated. My father looked ready to climb across tables. Several guests from Jason's side quietly started slipping toward the exits. Cowards. Then Jason's phone rang again. This time he answered. Not because he wanted to. Because he had no choice. The entire ballroom watched. Hello. Silence. Then whatever the caller said caused his knees to nearly buckle. No. There has to be some mistake. More silence. The color drained from his face. No, don't do that. Please. The room listened. Every single person. Then Jason whispered words I'll never forget. They already know? My stomach tightened. Who was on the phone? Then the answer arrived. The caller wasn't a friend. Wasn't family. Wasn't his lawyer. It was the trustee managing his grandfather's estate. And apparently someone had already forwarded them all the evidence. Including the affair. Including the family messages. Including everything. Jason ended the call and stared at the floor. Defeated. Broken. Terrified. I didn't need to ask what happened. The answer was written all over his face. But one elderly man stood before I could speak. A man I recognized immediately. Jason's grandfather's oldest friend. A trustee. Someone involved with the family estate. He slowly rose from his seat. The room fell silent again. Then he looked directly at Jason. You stupid boy. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The old man shook his head. Do you have any idea what you've just lost? Jason couldn't answer. Because he already knew. The inheritance. The trust. The properties. The investments. The money his family had spent years expecting him to receive. Gone. All of it. But the worst part wasn't losing the money. It was what happened next. Because that's when a woman near the back of the ballroom stood up. The same woman from the photos. The woman Jason had been cheating with. And she wasn't alone. She was holding the hand of a little girl. A little girl who looked exactly like Jason. And suddenly, the affair became the smallest secret in the room. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire ballroom stared at the woman standing near the back of the room. And at the little girl holding her hand. She couldn't have been older than 6. Dark hair. Brown eyes. Jason's smile. Jason's face. Jason's everything. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. A ripple of shocked whispers spread. Across the room. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I looked at Jason. His expression told me everything before anyone said a word. Pure panic. Pure horror. Pure guilt. The woman slowly stepped forward. The little girl squeezed her hand. Mommy, she whispered nervously. The woman nodded reassuringly. Then she looked directly at me. Not angry. Not smug. Just exhausted. Like someone who had been carrying a terrible burden for years. I'm sorry, she said softly. I never wanted to ruin your wedding. My throat tightened. Then why are you here? Tears filled her eyes. Because I found out 3 months ago he was getting married. The room became even quieter. She pointed toward Jason. He told me he was single. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. The woman laughed bitterly. Actually, he told me a lot of things. Jason looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. But she wasn't finished. My name is Hannah. She took a deep breath. And this is Ava. The little girl hid slightly behind her mother's leg. Then Hannah delivered the sentence that completely shattered whatever remained of Jason's carefully built image. Ava is Jason's daughter. Chaos. Absolute chaos. People started talking over one another. Several guests stood. Others pulled out their phones. One of Jason's cousins actually yelled. What? Diane looked seconds away from passing out. Brittany sat frozen in disbelief. I stared at Jason. Tell me she's lying. He couldn't. Wouldn't. Because he knew she wasn't. Finally, after nearly a minute of silence, he whispered. I was going to tell you. The room erupted. Even strangers laughed at that. The worst excuse in human history. You were going to tell your wife about your secret child? When? Before the honeymoon? Before retirement? At your funeral? I felt sick. Not because of the cheating anymore. Not because of the inheritance. But because there was an innocent little girl caught in the middle of all this. A child who clearly had no idea why everyone was staring at her father. Then Hannah reached into her purse. I brought something else. My stomach dropped. There was more? Apparently there was. She pulled out a folder. A thick folder. And handed it to me. Inside were court documents. Child support records. Missed payments. Legal notices. Years of paperwork. Years. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. Jason hadn't just hidden a daughter. He had spent years trying to avoid responsibility for her. The room watched in stunned silence. Then Hannah said something that made even Diane close her eyes in embarrassment. Your future mother-in-law knows all about Ava. I looked up sharply. Diane froze. Caught. Red-handed. Hannah continued. She's known since Ava was born. The room exploded again. Several guests turned toward Diane. The woman who had spent years judging me. Mocking me. Treating me like I wasn't worthy of her family. Meanwhile, she'd been helping hide her son's secret child the entire time. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. But then Hannah looked at me and said something that changed everything. Something I never expected. Emily, I wasn't the one who sent you the messages. I blinked. What? She shook her head. It wasn't me. A chill ran down my spine. If it wasn't Hannah, then who exposed everything? Who sent the photos? Who sent the group chats? Who sent the trust documents? Who destroyed Jason's perfect little plan? The answer arrived seconds later. The ballroom doors opened, and a familiar voice echoed across the room. That would be me. Every head turned. And when Jason saw who had just walked in, he looked more terrified than he had all night. Every head in the ballroom turned toward the entrance. The room fell silent once again. Standing in the doorway was a man in his late 60s. Tall, well-dressed, and judging by the look on Jason's face, someone incredibly important. I didn't recognize him, but Diane did. The second she saw him, all the color drained from her face. Oh no. The words slipped out before she could stop them. The man walked calmly into the ballroom. Several older guests immediately stood up. The trustees exchanged uneasy glances. Then one of them quietly whispered the man's name. Mr. Whitmore. The name meant nothing to me, until the trustee beside him explained. He's the attorney who helped create your grandfather's trust. Suddenly, everything made sense. Jason looked like he might collapse. Mr. Whitmore stopped in the center of the room and looked directly at him. You really thought nobody would find out? Jason couldn't answer. The attorney sighed. Your grandfather spent years building that trust to protect the family from exactly this kind of behavior. The ballroom remained silent. You weren't supposed to inherit wealth. He paused. You were supposed to prove you deserved it. Jason stared at the floor. Then Mr. Whitmore turned toward me. His expression softened. Emily, I'm sorry this happened to you. I nodded quietly, still trying to process everything. Then he continued. The anonymous email came from my office. A wave of surprise swept through the room. You sent it. He nodded. After receiving evidence from multiple sources, he glanced toward Hannah, then toward several uncomfortable members of Jason's family. Apparently more than one person had finally decided they'd had enough. Mr. Whitmore continued. For months we investigated allegations involving fraud, infidelity, hidden financial activity, and deception. The room gasped. Financial activity? There was more? Apparently there was. Because the attorney pulled out another folder. And what happened next completely destroyed whatever remained of Jason's reputation. The documents showed Jason had secretly borrowed money against future inheritance expectations. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Luxury cars. Investment losses. Private debts. Creditors. He wasn't marrying for love. He wasn't even marrying for stability. He was drowning. Financially. And he believed marrying me would help secure access to the trust. The trust he now no longer qualified to receive. Diane suddenly stood up. This is ridiculous. Mr. Whitmore calmly handed her a document. She read the first page, then immediately sat back down, defeated, because she knew it was true. For the next several minutes, nobody spoke. There was simply nothing left to say. The lies were exposed. The secrets were exposed. The cheating was exposed. The hidden child was exposed. The financial mess was exposed. Everything was out in the open. Then Jason finally looked at me. For the first time all evening, he seemed genuinely emotional. Emily. I raised a hand, stopping him. No. His eyes filled with tears. I loved you. I stared at him. Maybe part of him believed that. Maybe part of him even meant it. But love doesn't look like deception. Love doesn't look like humiliation. Love doesn't look like using someone as a backup plan. So I smiled sadly and removed my wedding ring. The room watched in complete silence. I placed it on the table between us. Then I said the simplest sentence of the entire night. Not enough. And walked away. The ballroom erupted behind me. Arguments. Shouting. Chaos. But I didn't look back. I walked outside into the cool evening air and took the deepest breath of my life. For the first time that day, I felt free. The marriage was annulled. Jason lost the inheritance. The trust funds were redirected into charitable foundations and educational programs, exactly as his grandfather's revised instructions allowed. Several members of his family cut contact with him entirely. Hannah eventually received the child support she and Ava deserved. As for me, I took the money that would have gone toward an extravagant honeymoon and spent 6 months traveling. I rebuilt my life. I healed. And a year later, I met someone who never made me question my worth for a single second. Sometimes people ask if I regret that wedding. Honestly? No, because that reception didn't ruin my life. It saved it. If Jason's family hadn't mocked me that night, if I hadn't stepped into that hallway, if that message had arrived even one day later, I might have spent years trapped in a lie. Instead, the truth arrived right on time. And it changed everything.